So imagine leaving for work one day, a somewhat normal day by all accounts, and suddenly being detained by the authorities, not just overnight, but for nearly a year. Your family, friends, and colleagues are frantic, and you're in solitary confinement just for doing your job. Incomprehensible? Not when you are a journalist working in dangerous locations. We're here tonight to shed light specifically on Evan Gershkovich, who was detained in Russia on March 29, 2023. Evan is a gifted journalist for the Wall Street Journal who has reported extensively on Russia, illuminating developments on the ground at a crucial time. Additionally, the Youngstown Press Club hopes to raise awareness of the dangers and threats to a free press and journalists working in dangerous situations worldwide. The Wall Street Journal has worked tirelessly to help free Evan, utilizing every resource at their disposal. When we became aware of this, we also vowed to help in whatever way we could as a club, and we reached out to the Wall Street Journal. Since raising awareness is key to their plan to help Evan, we welcome the opportunity to initiate an event. Part of our mission is to educate in multiple ways, be that through our speaker series, reading the names of killed journalists at a moving World Press Freedom Day ceremony, or putting our money where our mouth is and contributing to organizations such as the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which provides pro bono legal help to reporters. Our commitment continues tonight through a contribution we will make by the Youngstown Press Club from all of you through your purchased tickets to the Committee to Protect Journalists, a nonprofit organization which promotes press freedom worldwide. Those of you in this room will never ask why protecting journalists' freedom is important, but to those outside of the room, the answer is quite simple. A free press is the hallmark of a civilized society, and journalists should never feel as though danger dictates their reporting, regardless of if it is in Russia or in Northeast Ohio. On behalf of the governing board of the Youngstown Press Club, our executive director, the sponsors of tonight's event, and all members of the media, we publicly stand with Evan and welcome Paul Beckett to share more. So allow me to introduce Lisa Bannon for a more thorough introduction of Paul. Lisa?
Thanks, Lori. And thanks to the Youngstown Press Club for hosting this important event tonight. First, I just have to say it's really special for me to be back here in Youngstown, my hometown, where I was born and raised, where my father served as a local judge for many decades, and where I had so many formative experiences. Actually, I was just walking by and saw this stage of Powers next door, and I remember I actually danced the Nutcracker Ballet on that stage like 5 or 6 times when I was a kid. I began my journalism career here in the Mahoning Valley in the 1980s at the Tribune-Chronicle in Warren. And it was here that I really fell in love with our great profession after covering the 17th Congressional District race in 1984, which some of you might remember was between Lyle Williams and James Traficant. And honestly, it remains one of the most exciting stories of my career. After I left the Youngstown area, I reported about business from Toronto, Paris, and Milan. And it was in Milan that I joined the Wall Street Journal. And that's where I spent the past 31 years of my career as a reporter and an editor and a bureau chief. I left my full-time duties last summer, and I remain a contributing writer. So it was at the Journal that I had the privilege of getting to know and getting to work with our featured guest tonight, Paul Beckett. He's the assistant editor at the Journal, and he's based in Washington, D.C. And since last fall, his full-time job is working to free our colleague Evan Gershkovich, which, as you know, has been wrongfully detained in a Russian prison for nearly a year now. Paul's mission is to work with the administration, government officials, legal counsel, Evan's family, and internally at the Journal to ensure that Evan's captivity and release get talked about as much as possible. At the Journal, the effort to free Evan has been truly impressive, and it touches every part of the organization. The newsroom writes stories about developments in the case, the advertising department runs ads, circulation decides when to make content free, and marketing organizes a ton of really special events to raise awareness. Like, for example, there's an upcoming readathon public reading of Evan's work on March 27th that will commemorate the one-year anniversary of his arrest. A few words about Paul. He's worked his entire 34-year career at Dow Jones in various positions, and in many ways he's the perfect guy for this assignment since he has considerable experience running and overseeing reporters in dangerous places. He was the Journal's Asia editor based in Hong Kong, where he was in charge of all China digital and print operations as well as news coverage of the region. Before that, he was South Asia editor based in New Delhi, and there he was responsible for the paper's coverage of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Most recently, before taking on the Evan assignment full-time, he was Washington bureau chief, taking over just as Trump took office in 2017. Paul has won numerous awards and is the co-author of the book, Crimes Against Women, 3 Tragedies and the Call for Reform in India. He's originally from Scotland, which you may surmise when he says hello, and is also an accomplished painter, pointillist painter. Moderating tonight's event will be Brenda Linert, a longtime journalist in the Mahoning Valley, who most of you know as the editor of The Vindicator and the Tribune Chronicle. Before that, she served as news editor, news reporter, business writer, and Metro editor at the Tribune. Brenda recently retired from the newspaper business after nearly 30 years and started a new career as Director of Government Affairs and Community Impact at the Youngstown Warren Regional Chamber, where she is coordinating the Chamber's role in increasing population and workforce for the region. So join me in welcoming Paul and Brenda.
Thank you all for being here tonight for this very important conversation. Thank you for making the trip here from DC.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you all for coming. It's very nice to be here. It's my first time in Youngstown, and I have to say I've done a lot of these events over the last 4 or 5 months, or the last 11 months really, and I would like to thank the Youngstown Press Club because they are on it. They know how I would give them a big... They really did a wonderful job organizing this event. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, if I'm saying that correctly, will have been imprisoned in Russia now, pre-conviction, for a year next month. And from photos we have all seen, we had some out in the lobby on a slideshow, he does appear to be well. But first and foremost, can you tell us if if what we're seeing is true? Is he doing okay? Is he, what is his treatment like? How is his personal well-being?
Yeah, thanks, Brenda. So Evan was taken by the Russian security services on March 29th last year when he was out reporting for the Wall Street Journal, and only, I should add, for the Wall Street Journal. A long way from Moscow in Yekaterinburg, and the first we knew about it, he was pulled out of a restaurant with a jacket over his head. And then we saw him next in Moscow, where he was just outside Lefortovo prison, which is a pretty infamous security services prison in the middle of Moscow, where they had for many years in the Soviet era taken political dissidents and treated them abominably. It's designed to isolate its inmates and disorient them. Fortunately for us, Evan is a fluent Russian speaker, a very resilient young man, and he has held up remarkably well. We're all incredibly proud and impressed with how he has handled it. He is in a jail cell 23 hours a day. He gets out for 1 hour a day into an open area that is the same size as his jail cell, where he gets to walk basically 6 steps in a square. So he has maintained his equilibrium remarkably well, but I think he works very hard at staying okay. So we get to see him a couple of times a week. Dow Jones has Russian lawyers who get to see him once a week, I should say. 2 lawyers get to see him once a week. And that's our eyes and ears on him. So their reports are pretty vital for us as we hear about how he is doing, and he is also able to get and to send and receive letters. So that's also been very useful, and I think a very good way to keep his spirits up.
For sure. I did read an article recently, I think it was Scripps, where they interviewed his sister, and she was commenting on that he tries to keep a very regimented routine where he exercises in his cell and reads the letters and writes back and things like that, which I'm sure is very necessary to kind of keep your sanity if you're only getting out 1 hour a day.
I think so, and he's very lucky. His family is wonderful. I've had the honor of getting to know them over the last year, and that's been a bright spot for all of us at the Journal, because they have their own fascinating backstory in a way that sort of explains a fair bit of how Evan got to be there. His parents were Soviet emigres to the United States in the late 1970s, and they met when they were here, and Evan and his sister Danielle were both born here, but his Russian heritage was very much part of his growing up. So his parents had Russian nicknames for Evan and for Danielle. They celebrated Russian holidays. They spoke Russian in the house. And then it sort of came full circle when Evan was a young reporter. I think he was doing an reporting assistantship at the New York Times. And someone said to him, well, heavens, you speak Russian, you know Russia some, why don't you go to Russia? And made him a sort of perfect foreign correspondent. And that was something that he's lucky to speak the language, and I think what comes through in his reporting is how much he loved being there.
So you have personally spoken with him, but I understand that you have corresponded with him and have traded letters and things like that. Can you talk at all about what some of those communications were, or what he said?
I think the ones that are most important to him are the ones between him and his family. And it's funny because I think we've had a tremendous response to this, and we're extremely grateful for how much people have rallied to the cause. And so he has been inundated with letters, all of which get translated and censored. But the ones, I think, understandably, the ones that tend to jump out for him are the ones from his sister, where they trade celebrity gossip, and they talk about Arsenal Football Club, and which Evan's a big fan, and they are big fans. The rest of his family lives in Philadelphia, and he and his sister are big fans of the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, so they trade lines from it. So, and I think that is actually the kind of level that to some degree benefits him the most. I know he's very grateful for all of the expressions of goodwill and concern, but I think sometimes levity. He also has been engaged in probably an almost year-long chess match with his father.
Oh, wow.
Where they write
Oh,
which
that's
moves
fantastic.
Yeah, I think Evan's winning, apparently.
So let's talk a little bit about the actual arrest. The Wall Street Journal has been clear that Evan is being held on a sham charge and that he was only doing his job when he was picked up and charged with espionage. Can you talk about what he was covering, what his assignment was when he was picked up?
So he's a foreign correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. We were lucky enough to hire him in January of 2022. We'd been looking for Moscow correspondents for quite a while. We'd wanted to increase our presence there, and we hired two in one swoop, Evan and another Moscow-based reporter. So his beat was covering Russia, and again, he was sort of perfectly suited to it. It's funny, Lisa will appreciate this, that there's an era of foreign correspondents, ambitious foreign correspondents who wanted to tap into the new thing, and they all learned Japanese in the 1980s and 1990s, right? And then there was the next era of foreign correspondents who were going to tap into the new thing, and they all learned Chinese in the 2000s, right? But then there's always been this thread of reporters who have always just been fascinated by Russia, and Evan was one of those. So he was covering all kinds of things for us in Russia. He covered culture, he covered the economy, we are the Wall Street Journal. He covered politics, but he would go especially to places where he could meet with and talk to ordinary Russians. And I don't know any publication that would tell you what they were working on before they published. I'm not going to tell you what story we sent him out there to do, but I hope he gets published someday. But he was covering a very wide range of things, and some of the things, obviously, he had been in Ukraine a good deal. He was one of our main Ukraine reporters. So once the war started, he actually moved from Russia and moved to London, but we would dispatch him to Ukraine and back into Russia. And so he covered fascinating things that showed, I think, a great appreciation for Russian people and his love of being in Russia, even though he wrote some wonderful stories about Vladimir Putin and about Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, and things like that. He did the big sort of geopolitical pieces, but he also went to visit the families of Russians and who were receiving corpses back from Ukraine, and just to show that, you know, a death in war is a death in war, and this is the impact it was having in Russia. And he would go to places where there, you know, to military garrison towns where there was some questioning of the war aims, but that was such a minority that they just got completely drowned out by the enthusiasm that the Russians, I think I would say Putin had whipped up among the Russians before the Ukraine invasion. Or after a while, he did a lovely story about Moscow and life in Moscow, and how, you know, the war was going on over there, and all these conscripts were being sent from prison, and Moscow was thriving, and everybody was out in the streets, and they were out in jazz clubs, and they were all out having a grand time. So he really covered the gamut. Obviously, he was a long way Yekaterinburg's a long way from Moscow, so there was a reason for him being out there. But as I said, the first that we knew about it was he missed a couple of check-ins. So the Journal has very rigorous standards for people in dangerous places, and I'm afraid they were also to some degree forged in tragedy when we lost Danny Pearl in Pakistan in 2002. And ever since then, we've been extremely well organized in terms of security, in terms of check-ins, in terms of knowing where you are. You know, the years of I'll just go off and see what I can find foreign correspondent, especially in dangerous places, are long over for these kinds of reasons. So he missed 2 check-ins, and that was the first indication that he was missing. We didn't know what had happened to him, but that sent up a flare immediately with our security people. And then on the evening of March 29th, I was at one of these I was Washington bureau chief at the time, at one of these rather interminable Washington dinners with a visiting dignitary, and my phone went off, and it was Emma Tucker, who had just arrived as our editor-in-chief. And so I excused myself, went out into the courtyard of the restaurant, and she said, Paul, we've lost Evan. That's the moment that you just don't forget, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. You have described the Russian President Vladimir Putin's practice of taking hostages as a business. Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that?
It's a way for him to gain leverage over the United States. I don't think there's anything particular to Evan or his situation. We don't know any. We haven't seen any charge. He's charged with espionage, and of course, we know it is utterly false. The US government has stated repeatedly it's utterly false. We had the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner of Virginia, say publicly it was manifestly false. He's just not a spy, but he is an easy target if you are trying to gain leverage over the United States. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that. We've seen, Paul Whelan has been there 5 years, right? Brittany Griner was there, she came out. Trevor Reed was there, he came out. So that's to go out, you need somebody else, right? You've got to just, and they need to just keep it going. And the awful thing about these dynamics is, they immediately gain an edge by doing it because it forces the US government to respond. It puts the US government in a horrible position to try and get their people back, as President Biden has promised Evan's parents that he will get him back. And we're relying on that, but it's a sort of an industrial calculation on Putin's part that he can get something back that he wants by taking an American citizen. It's and it doesn't have to be a journalist. I think he achieved other aims of his by taking a journalist, but none of the other people were journalists. And I think it gives him leverage. The other country that has done a good deal of this is Iran. And again, Iran does it so that they will get something in return. And it's a pretty easy calculation on their part. And you saw it in the fall when the US unfroze $5 or $6 billion to get 9 people back from Iran. So it's just a horrible calculation. Our interest is in getting Evan back. The US government's interest, and we'd be happy to help in any way we can, is figuring out how to deter this in the first place. And it's something that I think all governments need to pay a lot of attention to. I think you talk to some of the people who have come out of Iran, and they, you say, well, what would you like to see done? Their point, someone made at a briefing I was at recently with someone who had been in jail in Iran for 10 years. He said, what is really, really maddening when you're in jail in Iran is hearing about or seeing Instagram posts from the children of the people who put you in jail from Disneyland. Right? And they were like, why aren't we going, why aren't we stopping that? Why are we giving access to the families of the people who put us in jail, and they're free to roam, and our freedom is curtailed, and that, in this person's estimation, was out of whack. So I think there are things that hopefully the US government will be able to consider that will stop this happening in the first place, because otherwise I worry it will continue. We've already seen since Evan was taken, Alsu Kurmasheva, who is a Russian-American citizen, and she works for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which is part of the same family of broadcasters of Voice of America. It's congressionally funded, and she was based in Prague. And she went to take medicine to her sick mother in Russia and was prevented from leaving, and now has had charges of being failing to register as a foreigner or as a foreign agent or and then more charges, and she's been in Russian prison for the last 100 days. And you're like, okay, well, there's the next one. Right? And the next one will be not far behind that, unfortunately.
Now, even though she is a journalist that's being held, it is still rare that Russia has charged any journalist with espionage,
Yeah.
as they've charged Evan. When was the last time that they charged someone, a journalist?
A journalist, this is the first time since the Cold War. There was a Newsweek reporter called Nick Daniloff that we've, per guy, have done a lot of research into his case last year, but he was jailed briefly back in the Soviet era. And I think the journalism piece, when I said it achieves a couple of aims beyond just giving currency to the Russians, it also puts such an extraordinary chilling effect on reporting from Russia. I think every American that was working for, I think probably any publication, but certainly any American working for any American publication in Moscow, and there were still many, left after Evan was taken.
Which certainly was their intent, was to
So it just had this huge chilling
stifle
effect.
the free press.
So you stifle foreign correspondency. A huge number of very brave Russian independent journalists have fled. And so now it's all being covered. There's still some people there for some organizations. They're fearful. They curtail their activities when you're even in Moscow. And otherwise, the foreign press corps that had been in Moscow is now in Berlin, in Warsaw, in Tbilisi, in Dubai, and anywhere else. And they're doing the best they can, and they're doing a good job. They would be the first to tell you that that is just a terrible way to cover one of the countries that, for better or for worse, is having, and will have a massive impact on the future direction of the United States.
And Russian laws against free press are very, to use the same word, stifling. It's just completely to publish stories.
Essentially practice what you and I would consider independent journalism.
Right.
And it's been getting worse. There used to be a sort of unspoken convention, which was extremely annoying when it happened, but if a country didn't like what you were writing and they really decided to take against it, they just kick you out, right? Evan was accredited with the foreign ministry in Russia as a reporter. He wasn't sneaking around. He had his press credentials from the government of Russia. They have just ratcheted up the laws to such a degree that, in our estimation, if you're practicing what we would consider journalism, it will be a crime. Right? So journalism has become, as we understand it, has become a crime. I'd also add that we've seen zero evidence. There's one charge, but the Russian legal system is so opaque that, again, I think the whole thing's a sham, but it's not even like we've been presented with anything that would explain why they did what they did.
Almost immediately after Evan's arrest, the State Department had designated that he was being unlawfully detained. Why was that designation so important?
It gets a little bureaucratic, so bear with me, but it is pretty vital in dealing with issues like this, and it has been, not just for journalists, but it has been for Paul Whelan, for Brittany Griner, and for everybody else. But 2015, the Obama administration formed an office called the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, which, given Washington's love of acronyms, is now called SPIHA. So SPIHA is an office that sits within the State Department, and its job is to be empowered to do what it takes to get Americans back. Right? Otherwise, you are an issue for consular affairs, the local embassy where you are, and the government will do what it can do from a consular perspective. If you become a case with SPIHA, it becomes a mandate that they do what they have to do to get their charges home. And you get assigned a case officer. That case officer is in close touch with the family. It's the head of SPIHA that goes to greet Brittany Griner when she gets, or Trevor Reed when he gets off the plane. And the only way to get to SPIHA is to be designated as wrongfully detained. and there are about 11 qualifications that you have to meet through the State Department. They study your case, and there are things like, was it politically motivated? You know, was in some cases, obviously not in Evans because he hasn't been tried, but in other cases, did the punishment far exceed the crime? You know, are there other motivations at work here? So there's 11 categories. If you meet them all, you get given to SPIHA. In Evans' case, that was obviously very important to us because Russia had publicly accused him of being a spy. And so it was important for us to have the State Department declare that he was, you know, that he wasn't, which the White House did repeatedly, but that he had been wrongfully detained. And they did it in record time. It often takes months and months to do it, and they did it in 12 days. So it was both important in practice because it meant it moved to this special office in the State Department, and in perception because it was the US government declaring that Russia was completely out of line.
And because of Russia's laws banning free press, basically, they view the actions of journalists in different ways. And if Evan was asking questions about something that they just didn't want to answer, they're labeling him a spy. But do they use the term spy in a different way that you or I would, or that Americans would?
I don't know. Something's funny because I don't know the answer to that. There's a line of thinking that when you find yourself in a situation like this, and one of your reporters has been taken, that if you're quiet about it, right, the people don't speak because his price will go up, or don't say anything and see if you can work it out. Right. And I think that has, in some cases, been effective when terrorist organizations have taken reporters hostage. You can work behind the scenes and see if there's a way to solve it without it escalating and becoming a big thing in public eye, which can complicate those cases. In our case, we did not have a choice. Overnight, after I got that call from Emma Tucker, that was about 8 o'clock. We spent about 2.5 hours that night getting to Secretary of State Blinken, John Feiners, Deputy National Security Advisor, Mark Milley, who was Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just telling everybody that we could, who had some brass in Washington, to say this is really important to us. And at that point, we just knew we'd lost him. And then overnight, Russia came out and said he'd been charged with espionage, right? Which means they consider him a spy. At which point we had no choice except to be as loud as we could possibly be for as long as we could possibly be, with as many allies echoing that refrain as we could be, because they had just falsely accused one of our employees.
Do you think that's, you said that a lot of people will think that you should keep it quiet or try to keep it low key. But do you worry that implementation of high-profile prisoner swaps, like the one involving Brittany Griner, or the increased awareness of arrests like Paul Whelan and now Evan, does that drive up the value of taking prisoners in Russia's eyes?
Our interest is Evan, and doing the government has to do. We would hope the government will do whatever they have to do to get him back. As I say, I think it takes me more back to how can the US government find a way to stop countries doing this, right? If you have to stop it happening in the first place. Once it's happened, then it's going, it gets on its own track. And the government, again, with this office I was talking about, SPIHA, that's its mandate, is to get people back. So in terms of, and when Russia says publicly, we have caught an American spy, falsely, obviously, I don't think I think at that point it's sort of set. I don't think it necessarily means that they would have taken less had we not said anything. I don't believe that.
I see, right. So upon his arrest, you said that you started contacting government officials to try to raise awareness and figure out what could be done. You also had told me previously that there were 4 steps that you do immediately, that you did whenever this happened. Could you talk about those?
Yeah, it was, we've sort of had a crash course in this because it's been a long time since we've had to deal with anything like it. And you realize pretty quickly, and this is something that we've tried to help other organizations, particularly Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty with, because we were about 8 months ahead of them on it. Really, you wind up with 4 areas that you have to maintain to consider yourselves being, well, hopefully the employer that any employee would want to have if they're in a similar situation, and to feel that you have all the avenues covered. The first one is the government. This will be solved by a government-to-government negotiation. The Wall Street Journal will not be part of those negotiations, but we need to make sure that the government has all the information they need. We need to get updates from them. We need to make sure that they are on the case. And the Biden administration has been very responsive to us, and we're grateful for that. Obviously, we're looking forward to seeing results. But you may have seen in early December, they said that they had made an offer to the Russians, which the Russians rejected, but it was a sign that things are happening, and obviously we hope that they've figured out a way to take it forward from there. So that is a channel that is chiefly handled by lawyers, outside lawyers for us that we have hired on Evan's behalf, but dealing with the administration. Second is Evan's family. Again, family and friends, they need our support, and they need to have all the help that we can give them during just a horrendous time for them. And that is both, whatever emotional support we can give by, we've really assigned one of our editors to help them with whatever it is that they need as often as they need it, and all of us are in touch with them much of the time, but things happen that you don't think about. So Evan was in London, he had an apartment, so who pays the rent? Right? He was taken about 3 weeks before tax day. Well, who files his taxes? Right? He has a Gmail account. Well, as with the bank account, if you don't use a Gmail account for a long time, it gets shut off. Right? There are all these fairly both practical and emotional considerations that you have to take care of, and that also goes for his group of friends. You want his friends, you want them helping in the effort, you don't want them asking, why isn't the Wall Street Journal doing more? So that's a very absolutely key constituency in all of this. Internally at the Wall Street Journal, everybody is looking at us to say, we have a lot of foreign correspondents, we have a lot of people in dangerous places, that could be me. What would you do for me? And it's just very important that we show our employees that we're doing what we can, and as not, they've been fantastic, get them involved in trying to raise awareness. So they now have projects. We swim for him, we run for him, we walk for him, we read for him. There's all these things that reporters have, he has lots of friends at the paper, mostly in Europe because that's where he was working. But who are like, what can we do? So it's wonderful to have the newsroom engaged. And then you find in weird ways for the media folks among you, it actually kind of travels over into every other part of the organization. I think some people would be like, well, that would just be for the newsroom and for the lawyers, right? And you guys will sort it out. Well, we've been very lucky with the response from other media. So the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal all ran ads on 100 days that he was detained, and that became a thing in and of itself. So on Morning Joe Scarborough holds up and says, oh, this is extraordinary, I've never seen anything like it. Those ads don't come from nowhere, right? That coordination, so that gets into the marketing department, that gets into the advertising department, that gets into the print department. When you say, okay, if you go on WSA.com to find out about Evan, Wall Street Journal's behind a paywall, it's quite expensive. But this is all free, and you go on WSA.com/Evan, that's free. That doesn't happen without someone in circulation fiddling with the knobs and making it all free, right? So you wind up having sort of every part, the government affairs people in Washington, when we say, well, it might be good for Evan's parents to meet senators and House members who are interested in this issue and are want to help, and we can try and ask them to be useful, then our government affairs people get involved and say, okay, we've set you up, and they've done a great job. They've kept it very bipartisan. We got a unanimous declaration in the House, and unanimous in the House don't go very well together these days, and we got a unanimous House declaration in support of Evan and condemnation of his detainment. So you sort of really, I honestly don't think there's our standards department, wonderful people who make sure we stay straight and exactly where we should be when it comes to our journalism. They get involved because they have to say, okay, well, some of this is advocacy and some of this is journalism. So at what point we just want to make sure that we're writing the right stories about Evan that meet the standards of the Wall Street Journal, right? So there's all these, honestly don't think there's a department at the Journal that hasn't, one way or another, to varying degrees, been involved in the effort. And then the final piece of it is trying to enlist the support of well-wishers and allies in the media and beyond to make sure that Evan doesn't get forgotten, because we just firmly believe that even though it will be a US government negotiation that gets him back, that will happen more easily if he is prominent. Right? The US government, every administration has a million priorities. It's easy to be distracted, and we just can't let them forget. So that's a piece of it where, and we've been very, very lucky. The support has been superb, and we're honored to meet as many people and do as many events like tonight as we can to make sure that people understand who Evan is and what the issues are that it raises.
And we can't overlook the fact that the Wall Street Journal is now employing you, your full-time employee, instead of being an editor. You're now, your sole purpose is raising awareness, correct?
Yes, well, I kind of touch on all four, but yeah, my full-time job is to try and think of things that we can do, and part of my life is really sort of being a reporter around Washington for two clients. One is Dow Jones, publisher of the Journal, and the other is Evan's parents. To go and talk to as many people as I can and say, if you're in our position, what would you be doing? And do you have any creative ideas? And sometimes we like to present things to the government, to be able to say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So yeah, that's my job.
Is there, I assume that there are things that are planned for the 1-year anniversary?
Yes, and we would love all of your participation. Some of the things that we are doing a 24-hour readathon in New York. We will do a lot of events. I'm sure we'll do a lot of interviews. If any of you are on social media, we're always very grateful if you help us amplify whatever we're doing with the hashtag #IStandWithEvan. And people often ask, what else can I do? And I get a little karmic about this, a little spiritual about it. If you pray for him. If you don't, think of him. Just thinking about him, talking about him, I'm convinced will make a difference. So the more that he is talked about, the more that word is spread about him. If you feel so inclined, we're always grateful if people talk to their members of Congress to say, hey, could you put in a word with the administration to make sure that they're on this? Anything that you can think about. Read his work, get familiar with him, have him be a journalist whose life you take an interest in would be hugely important to us, I think.
Now, I know that you're not an expert, so to speak, on the Russian judicial system. I'm sure you've been very educated on it as of late. Can you talk a little bit about what's expected going forward?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to tell. So the Russian judicial system, as we have seen it, is a series of court appearances that Evan makes either every 2 months or every 3 months, at which his pretrial detention, which is where we are at the moment, has been extended every single time. We've appealed every decision and we've lost every decision. So the latest one will be extended until March 30th, which is one day after his 1 year. I think in theory there is a line somewhere in the law that says that pretrial detention can only go for 12 months. So we would expect at some point after that for his case to move to trial. We don't know if we will see the trial. We don't know because of the national security considerations. We don't know where it would take place. And even that timeline, they can appeal for more time, they can take emergency measures. The short answer is they can sort of do what they want. So we are just looking at kind of a mist around this. And I think in Paul Whelan's case, which is the most analogous in terms of the charges, it was 18 months before he went to trial. But we'd certainly hope that, our hope is that we don't get anybody. We don't have to find out about the Russian judicial system because he's home.
And he almost certainly will be convicted.
I'm afraid so.
And if he is indeed convicted, what sentence does he face?
Up to 20 years.
In your opinion, do you have any hope of acquittal or release short of U.S.-Russian negotiations?
No, I think we're counting on the President's promise to bring him home, and the most common way we've seen that happen, doesn't have to be the only way. If there's another way, we'd welcome that, but the most common way is through some form of swap.
I'm sure that everyone here was alarmed, probably not necessarily surprised, to hear of the death of Putin's political foe, Alexei Navalny, last week. Obviously, it's different circumstances than what we're dealing with Evan, but what kind of message does that send about Putin's ruthlessness?
That obviously generated huge anxiety and distress around the world. In our case, we just have to stay focused on Evan and optimistic that he will come home and hopefully soon.
I think we were going to try to take some questions if there are any. Before we do that, is there anything else that you would like to add that I haven't touched on?
I appreciate it. Thank you for all the excellent questions. I think the piece of this at its highest level that we worry about is the assault on press freedom generally. I think it's something that you see increasingly around the world. Exact parallels to this, Iran, probably the most closest parallel. And Jason Rezaian, who's a Washington Post reporter who spent a year and a half in Iranian jail, has been a big ally of us in this. But we've seen reporters in China have a hard time, and many of them be expelled. India is a worsening environment for press freedom. Obviously, Gaza has been horrendous in terms of the journalistic toll that a lot of organizations like CPJ have taken, have documented very well. Turkey pulls people in everywhere. And just generally, there's a worsening of the environment for the provision of trustworthy information from around the world. And we just take the view that an assault, even if it's a long way away, and even if it's in our case, one Wall Street Journal reporter, one assault on press freedom is an assault on all press freedom. And that's the piece of it that I think the industry, is increasingly conscious of. And I just feel like we are, there's so many things that are going against good journalism, that shutting off sources of trustworthy information that you can get from important countries around the world is really, really worrying. So at its most existential level, that's how we think about it.
If there's any questions, we have a gentleman with a microphone.
Thank you. Hello. My question, with a little familiarity that I have with the federal and state judicial and prison system and their procedures, how are you sure that the letters you are receiving are really from Evan?
I think because no one could come up with clever lines about It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You know what I mean? Like, I think I think they're censored, right? So we take care, everybody takes care. The one thing we never want to do is do anything that gets him that deprives him of that, right? So, but I think I think they could only come from him. It's an excellent question, but I think they could only come from him. His parents certainly are, they're a lifeline for them. in a way
And how
that I
much
don't think-
confidence do you have in his attorneys?
Pardon me?
How much confidence do you have in his attorneys?
We're extremely grateful to them. It's not an easy task to take that on in Vladimir Putin's Russia. Right? And there aren't many firms that will do that, but we're very grateful to them. Obviously, it's not. We also have the U.S. Ambassador Lynn Tracy in Moscow has been in to see him a few times, probably roughly once a month, and we get the same kind of reports from there. So there is something of we have other eyes on it, but we're very grateful to his attorneys. And then, it's sort of heartbreaking to see it, but when we see him in his glass cage when they bring him out every 2 or 3 months, and you never know. You can never be sure, but if you talk to his family afterwards, his friends afterwards, they say, "Oh, he looked pretty good."
And one final comment is there are several articles written on how to do time in prison that are helpful, and I'm sure he's received those or he's thought about those or someone has sent some, because those are very helpful and they help people get through the prison time.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think for a while there he was reading books written by Russian dissidents who'd spent a lot of time in prison. I think he may have moved on from those, but that's an excellent point.
If I could just interject, she commented on the letters, and in the article that I had mentioned that I read in the interview with his sister, she had commented that a lot of these letters, or all of the letters, she doesn't actually get the letters, it's a photograph of the letters. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I honestly don't know why that is, but it is the whole translation effort is an excellent example of his friends working for the cause. They translate all of the letters to send to him that are sent to, there's a website, Free Evan Gershkovich. If you want to write to him, you can go to either freeevangershkovich.com or go through wsj.com/Evan, and there's a section that says if you want to write to Evan. And that whole translation process is led by his friends. He's a wonderful group of friends, and we're very grateful to him.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Paul, thanks for joining us today. I wanted to follow up on 2 comments that you made, which I found interesting. First was that one of the core issues that this exposes is the need for the U.S. government to stop other governments from engaging in this business of taking hostages. You mentioned one aspect of that, for example, restrictions on family members of oppressors traveling to the United States. I'd be interested in hearing your views on what other steps the U.S. government ought to be taking. And second question, I'll just go ahead and put it out there. Following up in your comment, you have a lot of foreign correspondents in a lot of dangerous places. Are you taking additional or new steps to protect them, in the wake of this incident? Thank you.
Thank you. So the first one, one of the things that I think Dow Jones lawyers have suggested, maybe we could just have sanctions immediately kick in whenever it happens, very directly on, and then they would be lifted if and when the person was released, something that was relatively targeted, I think. And people point out, quite rightly, that there are a huge number of sanctions already in place on Russia, have been for years, and obviously those were increased after the invasion of Ukraine. But things like that, are they targeting, could they be something that as soon as it happened, there was a sort of immediate impact that was lifted when that course was reversed. It's things like that. I did notice that the British, I think, were recently proposed in the wake of Navalny's death, some family member, prison officers directly sanctioning those. So some kind of pinpointed sanction regime may be a possibility. And the second one, the Journal has always had a big foreign correspondent network and will continue to have. And as I said, we do take extraordinary measures to ensure the safety of our correspondents. And Evan was taken in spite of those measures, not because of a lapse in those measures. So we know it's not risk-free exercise, but we've maintained and will continue to maintain that foreign correspondence network.
Do you think that the journal will rethink having foreign correspondents in Russia?
We don't have any there at the moment. We'll just have to see how that goes.
Hello. Quick background on me. My name is Nicholas Clementi. I'm 22 years old. I'm a journalism student from our graduate of Kent State University. Got my bachelor's last year. Paul and Brenda, I want to thank you guys for bringing relevancy to the Mahoning Valley and the Trumbull County as markets rise across the country and everything, and as this Rust Belt region city, we like to keep up with relevancy and stay in the loop of everything. So I appreciate you guys for being here today. A couple questions I have. You mentioned Brittany Griner a couple times tonight, and her swap that happened with the alias Merchant of Death. A source I have, who is a contractor for the Pentagon, has said that they hope it was a swap where the Merchant of Death was flipped, where we could gain intel from the transaction that happened. What do you think it would take to bring Evan back? If that was the case, it would take for a WNBA player. And now we are dealing with someone who is protected by a right in our amendment and is being accused of espionage. What would it take to bring him back?
That's really a government call. I appreciate the question. That's really a government call. We don't know exactly what was put forth in the offer that the State Department talked about in early December. Putin did talk at the end of his interview with Tucker Carlson about someone whose name has circulated previously, who is in Germany, that they're interested in getting back. But that will be down to the hard negotiations between the two governments. I think there's certainly, as I think you're probably suggesting, or I think a lot of people saw how difficult an issue this is, that it takes handing over the Merchant of Death to get back Brittany Griner. So that's the business.
Yeah. Well, obviously it is a deal with the government, and it is, to an extent, a classified engagement that's going on. My question is more along the lines of, with your experience dealing with things like this, what you thought it would take, if there was any difference from that answer that you gave.
Yeah, you're giving me more credit for my experience than I actually have. So I honestly don't know. It is classified, and all I really hope is that whatever it is, that they're on it. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's nice to see a journalism graduate.
Good evening, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Would you analyze for us the impact of the upcoming American election? You indicated that there's months involved in getting these people out, so it's more than likely Evan, I wish it weren't so, but Evan will probably be there in January of 2025. What do you think the impact of the election will be on what the Russians do and what you can do?
So I appreciate the question. I'll only take issue with you that we are just really hoping that he'll be back well before that. So we don't want to even sort of think that far ahead. The one thing I'd say about the situation as a political issue, we have been very happy to have it be a bipartisan political issue up to this point, and I think you've seen that in the House, as I said, the Senate, even in the media coverage of it. If you view, if you view the TV channels as sitting somewhere on the political spectrum, we've gone all across that. So we haven't seen to this point that it's become a partisan political issue, and we're very keen that it not become that. One interesting thing about the special presidential office, I talked about who are the people who are dealing with this at the most ground level. There's actually been extraordinary continuity across the administrations. Roger Carstens, who's the current head of that office, was a Trump appointee. And there was a Trump appointee before him, but the guy before him, I think, was an Obama appointee who stayed under in the Trump administration for a while. So, it is certainly, history would suggest that it's something that is dealt with at the government level as with some sense of continuity of priority, and we would certainly hope that that would continue.
The other part of my question is whether or not the Russians, how that would impact on their movements in this entire affair.
It may be, I don't know. Putin has talked about Evan twice. He talked about him once in December when just after the State Department said we made an offer that the Russians rejected. The next week, Putin had this event that's his annual press conference, and Valerie Hopkins of the New York Times asked him about Evan, and he said then, America has to listen to what it is that we want, but we do want him, we are looking for a solution to this. Right? And then at the end, if I recall it correctly, at the end of Tucker Carlson's interview, Putin again said this is something that we are looking for a solution to, and we just have to sort of figure it out in effect. But so neither of those suggested that he was anything other than let's negotiate. So we that's why we're hopeful that the governments can figure out something in a much shorter time frame.
The question that I have deals with the ballerina who just got taken for supposedly contributing to Ukraine. She has now been charged with treason.
Yep.
So how might that impact Evan's situation? Because now you have 2 U.S. citizens over there. So would that incorporate another swap in order to get her back? Because she has dual citizenship. She has Russian and American citizenship.
So, no, excellent question. I'd actually say they have 4. They have Paul Whelan, they have Evan, they have Alsu Kurmasheva, and they have the woman who was just arrested for contributing to some Ukraine causes. So I'd say that, I think if you looked at it and thought they were collecting people, I think you wouldn't be wrong. Right? I think it's especially difficult on the Russian-American side. Evan is a U.S. citizen. He's not a Russian citizen. Paul Whelan is a U.S. citizen. In the Russian system, if you're both, they treat you as Russian. So in Alsu's case, for instance, her detention has been in very, very unpleasant circumstances. And I fear the same would be for the young woman who just got grabbed.
In a broader sense, can you speak to the role of the Committee to Protect Journalists in this arena?
So one of my colleagues, Lisa's colleagues, James Grimaldi in Washington, is on the committee there. There are a lot of organizations that do excellent work in this area. Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Committee and Reporters Without Borders, and they do a very, very good job in documenting and advocating for reporters of all nationalities around the world. So they do a very, very good job of bearing witness to attacks on press freedom worldwide. I think our experience has been that other news organizations, when you're actually dealing with when it happens to you, could use our help, as we benefited from the help, particularly of the Washington Post, because they had Jamal Khashoggi, obviously, but Jason Rezaian and Austin Tice. Austin Tice has been in Syria for 11 years. Right? So, and there's really just nothing like having it happen to you as a news organization for you to realize all that's involved. And all of those organizations that you're talking about are excellent allies, but you have to as an organization, and I think the whole organization from the very top has to respond if you want to be as effective as I and we feel that we have to be. And we've done everything, well, we've done everything. We've done as much as we feel, we've been able to do, and he's still there. So I think it takes all the constituencies involved to push.
We have one more from the back.
The student from Kent touched on a question I wanted to ask, but would it bother you if someone similar to the version of death were swapped for Evan?
We want Evan home.
Pardon?
We want Evan home. So I don't mean to be flip about it,
You don't care what the price is what you're saying.
What's that?
You're saying you don't care what the price is.
I'm not saying I don't care what the price is. Our overriding priority is to get him back safely to his family and to the newsroom. I do think from a policy standpoint, the business that Russia and Iran are engaged in presents serious challenges to the American government, and I think they know that. And that's why I think they need to figure out a way to stop it happening in the first place, because as one of the Iranians that I talked to who had been in jail for that long, he says, as soon as you take someone, you win. They win. That was his view. They win, and you have to spend your time trying to persuade a government to level it out. But it's always to their advantage to do it. So yes, I think even the people in the government would say these are very, very unsavory.
Again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for being
here. Enlightening. My question is this, and you touched on this earlier in your conversation with Brenda, that what Putin's game in here is probably to quash into reporting that he can't control of what's really going on in Russia. Do you think there's a longer game being played here as well? I'm assuming that nothing like this would have happened to Evan if Putin didn't have a hand in it, in fact, ordered it. Am I wrong?
Again, we haven't seen any evidence of how it came about, or but I think Russia observers would tell you that nothing of this scale happens without Kremlin authority. I don't know that, but that's, I think there are plenty of Russia watchers who would say that nothing of this magnitude.
But back to my question, do you think it's just a case of him trying to quash independent reporting from Russia, or is there another long game being played here?
I think he's trying to gain leverage over the United States, and it has from his perspective, added benefit of quashing independent reporting. So I think and I don't, we have no reason to believe that Evan was targeted per se. I think, there was something about him. I think they maybe just saw a target of opportunity and took it.
So based on you talking about him, you worked with Evan personally?
Never met him.
Never met him?
No.
Wow. Well, I'll flip my question a little bit then. I'm really touched when you tell us a little bit about him as a person. So when everyone's telling you their stories about him, is there one that really stands out that, would, if you shared it with us tonight, or if you feel comfortable sharing with it, that other than that he likes It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is a great show, by the way, so I support that 100%.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've also, to the extent that you can get to know somebody through his family, I've gotten to know him through becoming close to them, and he has a ton of friends, and I've gotten to know them. We exchanged. The reason I've never met him is we hired him in Russia, and he spent his time in London and Ukraine. Really. He was the goal scorer and captain of the Princeton High School soccer team, who scored the winning goal when they became state champions in his final year in high school. Rather poignantly, Princeton won its next state championship last summer, and the team dedicated that championship to Evan, which was very nice. He is by all accounts, someone who can talk to anybody, which is a fantastic quality in a reporter, and will bring disparate groups of friends together. So he has friends from New Jersey, his friends from Princeton, he went to Bowdoin College up in Maine, he has friends from New York, and then of course he has friends from Russia and in reporting circles in Russia, and all of them say, he's the sort of person that would make sure that they all got to know each other and was sort of life of the party. He's an excellent gift giver, an extremely thoughtful gift giver, according to his sister Danielle. He is very keen on, as I said, Arsenal Football Club, and one of our small triumphs was smuggling in a banner to the Emirates Stadium in North London through one of the Arsenal supporters clubs, and there was a huge Free Evan banner across one of the stands. He's a keen cook, and he cooked, I think at Bowdoin he spent time cooking in the cafeteria there, and I think, really everything, it's always tricky because it would be like if it was people talking about you, but really everything I've heard about him, you think, what a lovely and distinguished 32-year-old. I mean, he's, right? So, he will go on and have an extraordinary career, hopefully in journalism when this is over.
Great question.
We have room for one more question.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you for coming, and thank you, Brenda. So, going around the country doing this, do you ever feel like you have to be careful of what you say so it doesn't implicate or affect his case negatively?
All the time.
Okay. In what regard?
No, we do. We do. Again, the paramount consideration is not saying or do anything that would make his situation worse. Right? And that's why, we do try and mind our words, because we're conscious that, anything that we said that would make life work for him would be just awful. And obviously, we want his parents and family to feel good about the ways in which we talk about him, and we don't want to do anything that would shift the focus away from really, at this point, a very single-minded effort to get him back. And I'll hear about it from our lawyers if nobody else.
Paul, thank you again.
Thank you.
If you would you just again mention some of the things that people can do to support him, whether they want to write a letter or post something on social media, or even is there somewhere where they could make a donation for, I don't know if there's a collection for legal funds or for the family?
We have been, get to know. I'm very grateful to all of you for coming. I was meant to say at the start too, I was very touched that you put on such hospitable Scottish weather for me. Thank you all for coming out and taking interest, and that just means a huge amount. So WSJ.com/Evan, you can read his work, you can see videos with his family, you can get to know him, think about him, talk about him. If you're on social media, #IStandWithEvan. And if you put that in, you should see a good deal there already. Please add your voices to that. If you want to write to him, freeevangershkovich.com. It might be freegershkovich.com, but just poke around, you'll find it. Or you can do it through the Wall Street Journal website, and if you do feel inclined, or if you are talking to any of your elected representatives about this as an issue either directly related to Evan or the greater cause of press freedom, we'd be extremely grateful. So thank you very, very much.
So first of all, we'd like to say thank you to Paul for being here tonight, because you've illuminated this very important topic, and so thank you for taking the time out.
you.
Brenda, thank you for your compelling questions.
Thank you, Brenda.
I think that both of you together really helped. Thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We appreciate the support and hope that you'll take advantage of some of the ideas that Paul had for making it a little bit more into the common parlance of what we do every day. So we'd like to invite you to attend a little reception that we have in the back, and hope that you'll stay. Paul, we hope that you'll stay for a little bit.
I'm looking forward to it.
And perhaps those of you who didn't feel comfortable in asking a question in the public might have a question. So again, thank you very much, and have a pleasant night.
Thank you.